At 0317 local time, a dairy farmer named Yossi Peretz was standing in a milking shed outside Metula, Israel's northernmost town, a place so close to the Lebanese border that on quiet nights you could hear the generators running in the Hezbollah observation posts on the ridge above. Yossi had been milking cows on this farm for 31 years. His grandfather built it in 1952, when the border was just a line on a map, and Lebanon was still called the Paris of the Middle East. Yossi's hands were on the udder clamps when the first sound reached him. Not a boom, not yet. First came the whistle, a single thin shriek cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like a surgical blade. He had heard rockets before. Every farmer in the north had heard rockets before. During the 2006 war, during the periodic flare-ups that punctuated life along the border like a metronome of violence. But what followed that first whistle was something Yossi Peretz had never heard, something no Israeli civilian had ever heard. What followed was a sound like the sky being torn in half. A continuous rolling thunder that did not rise and fall, but simply built, layer upon layer, until the vibration was no longer audible, but physical. A pressure wave that rattled the tin walls of the milking shed and sent the Holstein cattle into a frenzy of stamping hooves and rolling eyes. Yossi dropped to the concrete floor and covered his head with his arms. Above him, across an 80-kilometer front, stretching from the slopes of Mount Hermon in the east to the coastal cliffs north of Rosh Hanikra in the west, the sky had turned into a highway of fire. 3,000 rockets in 24 hours. That is the number that would eventually be confirmed by the IDF's Northern Command, by the intelligence analysts at Unit 8200, by American surveillance platforms monitoring the theater from 30,000 feet. 3,000. But numbers on a page cannot capture what 3,000 rockets look like when they are aimed at you. Each one is a point of light being born on a distant ridgeline. Each one traces an arc that your brain instinctively tries to calculate. Is it coming here? Is it going over? Is it falling short? Multiply that calculation by 3,000 and you have a cognitive overload that no amount of military training can prepare a human nervous system to process. This was not a barrage. This was a weather system, a storm front made of steel and high explosive that rolled south across the border with the inevitability of a natural disaster, except that natural disasters are not designed by engineers in Tehran and assembled in tunnels beneath the Bekaa Valley. Let us establish the baseline, because the baseline is what makes the next 24 hours comprehensible. Before this day, the largest single rocket barrage Hezbollah had ever launched against Israel was approximately 215 rockets in a 24-hour period during the August 2006 war. That barrage, which struck communities across the Galilee and reached as far south as Hadera, was considered a strategic shock. It triggered a 34-day war, a United Nations resolution, and a fundamental restructuring of Israeli air defense doctrine that led directly to the operational deployment of the Iron Dome system in 2011. 215 rockets reshaped the security architecture of an entire region. Now multiply that number by 14. That is what landed on northern Israel starting at 0317 on this particular morning. And it did not come in a flood. It came in waves, each wave calibrated to exploit a specific vulnerability in the multi-layered defense system that Israel had spent $17 billion building since that traumatic summer in 2006. The first wave, military analysts would later designate it Alpha, consisted of approximately 450 short-range rockets launched in a 90-second burst from pre-positioned launchers concealed in structures, culverts, and underground chambers within 5 kilometers of the border. These were primarily 107mm Katyusha-type rockets and 122mm Grad variants, weapons with a range of 20 to 40 kilometers and a circular error probable measured in hundreds of meters. They are not precision weapons. They are not designed to hit a specific building or vehicle. They are designed to saturate an area with fragmentation and blast. They are designed, in the cold language of military doctrine, to compel defensive systems to activate and expend resources. Alpha was the bait. Iron Dome responded exactly as programmed. The system's ELM-2284 multi-mission radar, a phased array sensor manufactured by ELTA Systems capable of simultaneously tracking over 1,000 objects in flight, detected the incoming salvo within 3.7 seconds of launch. Battle management software classified each track by projected impact point, filtering out rockets assessed as heading for open ground, where interception would waste valuable Tamir missiles, and flagging those on trajectory toward populated areas or critical infrastructure. Of the 450 rockets in Alpha, approximately 290 were assessed as threatening. Tamir interceptors began leaving their launch canisters in ripple-fire sequences, each 20-canister battery contributing to a defensive web designed to place a kill vehicle within the engagement envelope of every threatening inbound. The interception rate for Alpha was extraordinary, according to data that would later be presented to the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in a classified session, whose details were partially leaked to Haaretz within 48 hours. Because this is Israel, and classified in Israel means classified until a journalist buys a source dinner. Iron Dome achieved a 96% kill rate against assessed threats in the first wave. Explosions bloomed across the night sky like orange flowers opening in fast forward. Debris rained down, twisted fragments of rocket casing and interceptor shrapnel pinging off rooftops and car hoods across the western Galilee. The shelter alert system, triggered automatically by the radar tracks, sent millions of smartphone notifications simultaneously, crashing local cell networks within 2 minutes. Sirens wailed from Kiryat Shmona to Acre, and in the Iron Dome battery command posts, the ammunition counters began their relentless downward march. This is the detail that matters. Each Iron Dome battery carries between 60 and 80 Tamir interceptors in its standard configuration. Northern Command had, according to estimates compiled by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, between 15 and 18 batteries deployed or on rapid response standby across the northern sector. At maximum loadout, that represents roughly 1,200 to 1,400 interceptors available before resupply. Alpha consumed an estimated 280 Tamers in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. The math is not complicated. It is terrifying. At that rate of consumption, the entire northern interceptor inventory would be exhausted in approximately 7 to 8 minutes of sustained fire, and Hezbollah had enough rockets to sustain fire for days. But Hezbollah did not sustain fire. This is where the sophistication of the attack plan became apparent, and this is where analysts from the Rand Corporation, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment would later identify the fingerprints of Iranian strategic planning. After Alpha, there was silence. 7 minutes of silence. Just long enough for Iron Dome operators to begin reloading from pre-positioned ammunition stocks. Just long enough for the radar picture to clear. Just long enough for the human operators, flesh and blood soldiers sitting in cramped command trailers, staring at screens still smeared with the ghost tracks of 290 intercepts, to exhale. Then came Bravo. Bravo was different. Bravo was not 450 unguided Katyushas. Bravo was 120 Falak 2 rockets, 240mm heavy rockets, with a range of approximately 11 kilometers, and a warhead capable of leveling a 2-story building. Mixed in with the Falak 2s were an estimated 30 to 40 Zelzal-type rockets, larger weapons with extended range that could reach Haifa and its critical port infrastructure. And embedded within this salvo, like poisoned needles in a haystack, were 8 to 12 precision-guided munitions, weapons that American and Israeli intelligence had been tracking with increasing alarm for years. These were Fateh 110 derivatives, solid-fueled ballistic missiles with GPS-aided inertial navigation systems, capable of hitting a specific building from a range of 300 kilometers. The Iranians call them Har surgical, Data. The Israelis call them Har game changers. The people in the buildings they are aimed at call them nothing, because they never hear them coming. Iron Dome was not designed to intercept ballistic missiles. That mission belongs to David's Sling, the medium-tier system jointly developed by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and Raytheon, and to the Arrow system, specifically Arrow 2 and Arrow 3, designed for exo-atmospheric and high endo-atmospheric intercepts of theater ballistic missiles. When Bravo launched, the Israeli Battle Management Network, a system known as Golden Citadel, which integrates all 3 defense tiers through a common operating picture, had to make instantaneous decisions about which interceptor system engaged which threat. This is the scenario that keeps missile defense engineers awake at night. It is called a chaos complex salvo, a simultaneous attack combining multiple weapon types at multiple speeds at multiple altitudes, designed to force the defender into split-second allocation decisions where every choice has a cost. Its Stunner Interceptor, a two-stage missile with a unique dolphin nose design that uses both a radar seeker and an electro-optical seeker for terminal guidance, launched in pairs against each assessed ballistic track. Aero batteries stationed deeper inside Israeli territory engaged the Fateh 110 class missiles at higher altitude. An Iron Dome continued grinding through the Falak 2s and remaining Katyusha-type weapons, burning through interceptors, like a man throwing handfuls of diamonds at an avalanche. What happens when Charlie overlaps with Bravo? What happens when the sky is not sequential, but simultaneous? That answer was 60 seconds away, and it would change the definition of air defense forever. Charlie arrived at 0341, while Bravo was still in the air. In Tel Aviv, the Israeli Security Cabinet convened in the underground National Crisis Management Center beneath the Kiryat military headquarters at 0445. The Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, the Chief of Staff, the heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, and Military Intelligence, Amman, the commander of the Israel Air Force, and the commanders of Northern and Central Commands were present either physically or via secure video link. The intelligence picture presented by the head of Amman's research division was blunt. Hezbollah had launched approximately 1,700 rockets in the first 88 minutes. Current rate of fire suggested a sustained capacity of between 100 and 150 rockets per hour for at least an additional 48 to 72 hours. Total estimated arsenal remaining, between 120,000 and 148,000 rockets and missiles of various types, distributed across approximately 6,500 launch sites and storage facilities in southern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley, and the southern suburbs of Beirut. Charlie was not a barrage. Charlie was a symphony of destruction, conducted by someone who understood Israeli air defense architecture with the intimacy of a surgeon who has studied the patient's anatomy for 20 years. And that is precisely what Hezbollah had done. Since 2006, the organization's intelligence apparatus, Unit 910, the External Operations Division, working in tandem with Iranian technical advisors from the IRGC's Quds Force Technology Directorate, had systematically mapped every Iron Dome battery position in northern Israel. They tracked the battery rotations, they monitored the resupply convoys, they cataloged the radar signatures, they knew, within a reasonable margin of error, how many Tamir interceptors each battery carried, how long a reload cycle took, and most critically, they knew the engagement envelope boundaries, the geographic zones where coverage overlapped, and the zones where it did not. Charlie exploited the seams. 560 rockets launched simultaneously from 3 distinct geographic clusters, timed to converge on a single corridor, the 8-kilometer stretch between Kiryat Shmona and Safed, from 3 different azimuths within a 30-second window. This meant that the ELM-284 radars tracking the salvos had to simultaneously process threats arriving from compass bearings, separated by over 90 degrees, while maintaining track on residual Bravo missiles still in terminal descent. The processing load exceeded the system's designed concurrent track capacity. This was not a failure of Israeli engineering. 12 rockets from Charlie impacted inside the municipal boundaries of Kiryat Shmona within 4 seconds of each other. The first struck the parking structure adjacent to the Kiryat Shmona shopping mall, detonating at ground level and collapsing 2 floors of reinforced concrete onto approximately 30 vehicles. The second and third struck residential buildings on Trumpeldor Street, 5-story apartment blocks constructed in the 1960s without reinforced safe rooms, because when they were built, the concept of a safe room in every apartment was decades away from becoming building code. The 4th through 8th landed in a rough cluster around the industrial zone on the town's eastern approach, igniting fires in a paint warehouse and a building supplies depot that would burn for 11 hours. The 9th, 10th, and 11th struck open ground, 1 in a public park, 2 in agricultural fields, causing no casualties, but cratering the landscape with blast signatures that would be visible on commercial satellite imagery within hours. The 12th rocket, a 220mm weapon carrying a warhead packed with approximately 22,000 steel ball bearings designed to maximize anti-personnel effect, struck the roof of a community shelter on Hagalil Street, where 47 residents, including 19 children, had gathered when the sirens began. The shelter held. The reinforced concrete roof cracked, but did not collapse. 14 people inside suffered injuries from concussion and falling debris. 2 elderly residents suffered cardiac events. No one in that shelter died. This single architectural decision saved 47 lives. Remember that fact. Hold it alongside the numbers that follow, because in the calculus of this day, survival and catastrophe were separated by 12 inches of concrete, and the professional conscience of a person who specified the correct rebar density on a construction drawing that was filed in a municipal office and forgotten until the moment it became the only thing standing between 19 children and a cloud of 22,000 steel ball bearings, traveling at 4,000 feet per second. By 0400, 43 minutes after the first whistle that Yossi Peretz heard in his milking shed, Iron Dome had expended an estimated 640 Tamir interceptors across the northern sector. That represents approximately 45 to 53% of the total pre-positioned inventory, depending on which loadout estimate you accept. The interception rate, which had been 96% during Alpha, had degraded. Not because the system malfunctioned, not because the technology failed, because mathematics does not negotiate. When the number of simultaneous inbound threats exceeds the number of available interceptor missiles that can be guided to those threats within the engagement timeline, some threats go unengaged. The technical term is Auger leakage. The human term is a rocket landing on a street where someone's daughter is running toward a shelter. By 0400, Iron Dome had expended an estimated 640 Tamir interceptors across the northern sector. That represents approximately 45 to 53% of the total pre-positioned inventory, depending on which loadout estimate you accept. The interception rate, which had been 96% during Alpha, had degraded, not because the system malfunctioned, not because the technology failed, because mathematics does not negotiate. When the number of simultaneous inbound threats exceeds the number of available interceptor missiles that can be guided to those threats within the engagement timeline, some threats go unengaged. The technical term is Hurst leakage. The human term is a rocket landing on a street where someone's daughter is running toward a shelter. Northern Command activated Protocol Shechem at 0411. The scope was staggering. 28 communities within the immediate border zone, towns, kibbutzim, moshavim, and individual farmsteads scattered across terrain that ranges from the fertile Hula Valley floor to the basalt ridges of the Golan Heights, containing a combined population of approximately 64,000 permanent residents. In summer, with tourists, seasonal agricultural workers, and reservists' families visiting, the number could be higher. On this particular night, the estimate used by Northern Command's Civilian Coordination Division was 58,000 souls who needed to move south, in the dark, under rocket fire, using a road network that consisted of essentially 4 primary arteries, routes 90, 85, 77, and 65, all of which were within range of Hezbollah's medium-range rocket systems. Evacuation under fire is the most complex operation in civil defense. Every vehicle on the road is a target. Every traffic jam is a kill zone. Every overturned truck blocking a lane is a cascading failure that ripples backward through the system, trapping hundreds of families and vehicles on an exposed highway while rockets fall on both sides of the road. The Israeli Home Front Command, Pikud HaOref, had pre-positioned buses at staging areas in Tiberias, Afula, and Carmiel. These buses were supposed to deploy north to collection points in the border communities, load evacuees, and convoy south to reception centers established in schools, community centers, and hotels in the Hadera-Netanya corridor, approximately 130 kilometers from the border. The plan was elegant on paper. The problem was that the bus drivers were civilians, contract employees working for the Egd and Dan transportation companies. When the sirens began, when the sky turned orange, when the smartphone alerts crashed the cell network and the television channels switched to continuous emergency broadcasts showing footage of explosions across the Galilee, footage that was being streamed live by residents on TikTok and Telegram before the military censor could establish information control. 11 of the 42 bus drivers assigned to the northern evacuation route refused to drive. They were not soldiers. They had no legal obligation to drive into a rocket engagement zone. They had families of their own. 11 drivers, 26% of the fleet. In the arithmetic of evacuation, 26% fewer buses means 26% more people standing at collection points watching the sky and waiting. At 0438, a Zelzal-class rocket impacted 17 meters from the northbound lane of Route 90, approximately 3 kilometers south of Kiryat Shmona. The blast cratered the road surface, shattered the windshields of 4 civilian vehicles in the southbound evacuation flow, and killed 2 people, a 43-year-old physical therapist named Dorit Avraham and her 14-year-old son, Noam, who were in the front seats of a white Hyundai Tucson that absorbed the full lateral fragmentation pattern. Their vehicle rolled into the drainage ditch on the road's western shoulder, blocking the emergency lane. Behind them, 700 vehicles carrying approximately 2,000 evacuees came to a stop. They sat there, engines idling, headlights illuminating the smoke and dust, for 23 minutes before military police cleared a bypass through an adjacent agricultural access road. 23 minutes, stationary, on an exposed highway, under rocket fire. This is what evacuation under fire looks like when it transitions from doctrine to reality. The Air Force commander presented the strike options. The IAF had pre-planned target packages, what the military calls a target bank, for Lebanon that had been continuously updated since 2006 under an operational concept known internally as Dahiya Plus, an evolution of the controversial Dahiya doctrine articulated by Major General Gadi Eisenkot, who stated publicly in 2008 that in any future conflict, Israel would apply disproportionate force against civilian infrastructure used for military purposes. The target bank for Lebanon contained, according to estimates published by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, between 12,000 and 14,000 individual targets, categorized by tier. Tier 1 targets were strategic leadership, Nasrallah's command bunkers, the Shura Council meeting sites, senior military commander residences. Tier 2 were military infrastructure, rocket storage facilities, tunnel networks, communications nodes, drone launch sites. Tier 3 were dual-use infrastructure, bridges, power stations, fuel depots, port facilities, assessed as supporting Hezbollah's military logistics chain. The IAF could strike 200 to 300 targets per day using its fleet of approximately 65 F-35I Adir stealth fighters, 125 F-15I Rayam and F-16I Sufa strike aircraft, and a growing fleet of loitering munitions and armed UAVs including the Hermes 900 and Heron TP platforms. The math again, 14,000 targets, 300 strikes per day, 47 days to work through the list, assuming perfect intelligence, 0 aircraft losses, unlimited precision munition stocks, and no operational pauses for weather, maintenance, political constraints, or the inevitable fog of war that degrades every military operation in history. 47 days, and during those 47 days, Hezbollah would continue launching 100 to 150 rockets per hour. That is 2,400 to 3,600 per day. Over 47 days, assuming Hezbollah's arsenal held and its launch crews survived, which Israeli strikes would progressively degrade but not eliminate, the total number of rockets impacting Israeli territory could exceed 100,000. 100,000 rockets on a country the size of New Jersey, with a population concentrated in a narrow coastal corridor where 70% of the nation's GDP is generated. Option 1. Air campaign only. Massive, sustained aerial bombardment of Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon, combined with special operations raids against high-value targets. No ground incursion. Duration, 4 to 6 weeks. Projected Israeli military casualties, 50 to 120. Projected Israeli civilian casualties, 300 to 800. Projected Lebanese civilian casualties, 4,000 to 12,000. Estimated Hezbollah military capability destruction, 40 to 60%. Option 2. Limited ground incursion. Air campaign combined with a ground operation to establish a buffer zone extending 5 to 8 kilometers into southern Lebanon, clearing Hezbollah's short-range rocket positions and tunnel infrastructure along the border. Duration 6 to 10 weeks. Projected Israeli military casualties 200 to 500. Projected Israeli civilian casualties 200 to 500, lower than option 1 because the ground operation would suppress short-range launch sites faster. Projected Lebanese civilian casualties 8,000 to 20,000. Estimated Hezbollah military capability destruction 60 to 75%. Option 3, full-scale ground offensive. Air campaign plus a multi-division ground offensive pushing to the Litani River, 29 kilometers from the border, with the objective of physically occupying the territory from which the majority of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal could range northern Israel. Duration unknown, potentially months. Projected Israeli military casualties 500 to 2,000. Projected Israeli civilian casualties from continued rocket fire during the operation, uncertain but potentially lower in the long term if the operation succeeded. Projected Lebanese civilian casualties, catastrophic. The word used in the INSS analysis was literally catastrophic. Estimated Hezbollah military capability destruction, 75 to 90% in the area south of the Litani, 0% in the Bekaa Valley and Beirut, where the long-range missile arsenal is concentrated. The Security Cabinet voted. The result was not unanimous. 2 ministers dissented, and the option selected, the option that would determine whether this crisis remained a contained regional conflict or metastasized into something that drew in Iran, the United States, and potentially Russia, was not the option recommended by the Chief of Staff. The gap between the military recommendation and the political decision would define the next 72 hours, and in that gap, people would die who did not have to die. While the Security Cabinet deliberated underground in Tel Aviv, the crisis was propagating outward at the speed of light through the global information and financial systems with a ruthless efficiency that no military censor could contain. Bloomberg terminal alerts began firing at 03:22 GMT, 5 minutes after the first rockets launched, 4 minutes before the IDF spokesperson's unit issued its first official statement. Oil futures spiked. Brent crude jumped $4.17 per barrel in the first 11 minutes of trading on the ICE exchange, the fastest intraday move since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. By 0400 GMT, the spike had reached $7.43. By 0500, it had touched $11 even, a move that, if sustained, would add approximately 31 cents per gallon to the retail price of gasoline in the United States within 10 days, and trigger a cascade of hedging activity across the global derivatives market that would occupy every energy trading desk on the planet for the next week. The logic driving the spike was not the rockets themselves. Lebanon produces no oil. Israel produces negligible quantities. The logic was proximity and escalation risk. The Strait of Hormuz, the 21-mile-wide choke point through which approximately 21 million barrels of oil pass daily, representing roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption, is controlled on its northern shore by Iran. If this conflict escalated to a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, the strait could be threatened. Not necessarily closed, the United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, exists specifically to prevent that, but threatened. And in oil markets, the difference between a threat and an actuality is measured not in policy papers, but in risk premiums that get priced into every barrel traded on every exchange worldwide. The risk premium alone, the market's quantification of the probability of supply disruption, was worth between $8 and $15 per barrel, according to models published by Goldman Sachs' Commodities Research Division. Lloyd's of London activated its Joint War Committee protocols for the Eastern Mediterranean, expanding the listed areas, the geographic zones where vessels require additional war risk insurance, to include the entire Israeli coastline and all Lebanese territorial waters. War risk insurance premiums for vessels transiting the area jumped from approximately 0.05% of hull value to 0.75% overnight, a 15-fold increase that effectively added between $200,000 and $500,000 per transit for a standard Aframax tanker. 3 major container shipping lines, Maersk, MSC, and CMA CGM, announced precautionary diversions of vessels scheduled to call at Haifa port, Israel's largest commercial port, handling approximately 60% of the country's containerized imports. The supply chain implications were immediate. Israel imports 90% of its consumer goods, 85% of its grain, and 100% of its crude oil by sea. At 05:17 local time, 2 hours exactly after the first rocket launch, a secure telephone line connected the underground situation room beneath the Kiryat in Tel Aviv to the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon. On one end, the Israeli Defense Minister. On the other, the United States Secretary of Defense. The conversation lasted 19 minutes. What was requested in that conversation, and what was refused, would leak to the Washington Post within 72 hours, and trigger a political earthquake in both capitals. But the immediate question, the question that both men understood as they spoke across 6,000 miles of encrypted fiber optic cable, was simpler and more urgent than politics. How many interceptor missiles does Israel need? How fast can the United States deliver them? And what happens if the answer is not fast enough? The answer to the interceptor question was simple. There weren't enough, and both men on that encrypted phone call knew it. A Tamir interceptor, the missile that makes Iron Dome work, cost approximately $50,000 per unit. It is manufactured by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems in Israel and at a co-production facility operated by Raytheon in Tucson, Arizona. Maximum combined monthly output across both plants, running 3 shifts, 550 to 600 missiles. Northern Command had burned through 640 interceptors in the first 88 minutes of engagement. An entire month's production, gone in under 90 minutes, and the rockets kept coming. By 0600, Waves, Delta, Echo, and Foxtrot had launched. Total count passed 1900. Interceptor stocks fell below the red line, the threshold where the system transitions from area defense to point defense, protecting only military installations, hospitals, critical infrastructure. Everything else, residential neighborhoods, schools, highways packed with fleeing civilians, falls outside the shrinking bubble. Residents didn't learn this from press releases, they learned it from sound. The familiar double boom of a Tamir intercept, almost reassuring after years of living under the dome, stopped. Rockets kept falling, sirens kept wailing, but the booms were gone, and that is when evacuation became flight. Route 90, the 2-lane highway running along the Jordan Rift Valley, became a parking lot by 6:30. Bumper-to-bumper traffic stretched 35 kilometers from the Hula Valley to the Sea of Galilee. A fuel tanker jackknifed at the Korazim Junction. Military police meant to manage traffic had been diverted to Kiryat Shmona for casualty evacuation. On Route 85, a rocket struck a silver Toyota Corolla, carrying a family of 5 from Moshav Dalton. The father, a 37-year-old software engineer named Ayal Mizrahi, was killed instantly. His 3-year-old daughter was found alive in her car seat, covered in dust and glass, silently gripping a stuffed elephant. The photograph of that child with that elephant, taken by a Reuters photographer, ran on the front page of every major Western newspaper the following morning, and did more to shape the international response than every diplomatic cable combined. By 0800, the IDF confirmed 2,300 rockets in under 5 hours, 21 civilians dead, 340 wounded. On the border, Hezbollah's Radwan force, elite special operations, 500 to 800 fighters, had been detected at 7 staging points in tunnels within 2 kilometers of the fence. Intelligence assessment, 60 to 90 minutes from a go order to infiltration. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group sat 270 nautical miles off the coast. Schelling's deterrence theory in steel form, 100,000 tons of argument. But deterrence had failed. 3,000 rockets is not a theory. Israel's defense minister asked the Pentagon for 3 things. First, emergency transfer of Tamir interceptors from pre-positioned U.S. War Reserve stocks in Poland and Qatar. Estimated availability, 300 to 500 rounds. Not a solution. A 24 to 48-hour reprieve. Second, deployment of Aegis-equipped destroyers to augment Israeli air defense, technically feasible. Politically, direct American entry into the conflict. The Secretary of Defense didn't say yes, didn't say no, said, "I'll consult with the President." In Washington crisis speak, that means, "We understand, and we're not ready." Third, and this is what would leak to the Washington Post 72 hours later and detonate like a political bomb in both capitals. Diplomatic cover for a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Not a request for military participation. A request for assurance that if Israel acted, the United States would not oppose it at the UN Security Council. The Pentagon's response: that conversation needs to happen at a different level and at a different time. Translation: don't do anything irreversible. How does this end? 3 scenarios, not predictions, frameworks. Scenario 1: managed escalation, air campaign, limited ground incursion, emergency interceptor resupply, ceasefire in 3 to 5 weeks. Fatal weakness: it is an exact replica of the arrangement that just failed. Scenario 2: regional conflagration, Iran enters directly, the US is drawn in, the Strait of Hormuz is threatened, oil hits $150 to $200 a barrel, global recession, restraining factor, nobody wants it. Scenario 3: the unprecedented, regime change in Tehran, a diplomatic grand bargain solving everything or solving nothing but buys a decade. The history of this region includes moments when the unprecedented happened. It happened because someone decided the cost of the status quo exceeded the risk of doing what had never been done. Come back to where we started. The milking shed outside Metula. Yossi Peretz. By sunrise he was gone, loaded into his neighbor's truck with his wife, his daughter-in-law, and his 4-year-old granddaughter. He left the cows. 31 years of milking cows on land his grandfather built, and he left them standing in their stalls with full udders and no one to tend them, because when the sky splits open, the arithmetic of survival reduces to a single binary: stay or go. 3 days later, a Reuters photographer visited the abandoned Peretz farm. The cows were alive, dehydrated, distressed, standing in a shaft of sunlight falling through a shrapnel hole in the tin roof. That photograph ran alongside the photograph of the 3-year-old girl with the stuffed elephant. 2 images, a child and a cow, the vulnerable and the abandoned, the war reduced to its essence. 2,300 rockets fell in the first 5 hours. By the time you hear this, the number will be higher, the interceptor stocks will be lower, the roads south will be longer, and the question, how does this end, will still be waiting for an answer. Because the answer requires something that rockets cannot deliver and interceptors cannot provide. It requires a decision, by leaders on all sides, that the cost of the next war is greater than the cost of the compromise that prevents it. That decision has not been made, because in this region, compromise is synonymous with betrayal. Betrayal of the dead, betrayal of the cause, betrayal of God's promise. And until the living are valued more than the grievances of the dead, the rockets will keep coming. Iron Dome will be reloaded, the buses will run, the craters will be filled, the cows will be milked, someone will go home. That is the one prediction the history of this land validates without exception. Someone always goes home. The question is what they find when they get there.